Hello and welcome to you all, wherever you are. Thank you for joining this concurrent session entitled, What do we need to monitor, measure and assess in transformative education, gaps and opportunities? My name is Kate Greer and I am joining you from London, UK today. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Melbourne and the Associate Director of the Monitoring and Evaluating Climate Communications and Education Project, or the MECE project, which is a global research policy-making partnership that is seeking to enhance the quality and increase the quantity of climate communications and education around the world. You can learn more about the MECE project in a concurrent session tomorrow. I'm stepping in today on behalf of Marcia McKenzie, who is Director of the MECE project, but due to the evolving pandemic, has found herself travelling between Australia and Canada today. Marcia sends her sincere apologies for not being able to moderate this session today. Now, on to today's session. Today's session will discuss gaps and opportunities for monitoring progress in transformative education. There are a few promising practices measuring impact and progress in transformative education, looking at inputs, the learning environment, learning outcomes and so on. But there remain many gaps when it comes to fully capturing the transformation of individuals, societies and education sector itself. What evidence is needed to improve the quality of teaching and learning in transformative education? Where are the gaps? Can they or should they be filled? This session will last for 70 minutes and will consist of 3 presentations followed by a panel discussion. Our final presentation today will be a pre-recorded video. Throughout the session, we invite you to use the chat function to submit questions, and my colleague Jun will monitor the chat. We'll begin the session now with a question via Slido, and we invite you to submit your responses. We'll give you about 2 or 3 minutes for this, and so we'll ask the technical team to please upload the Slido now. The Slido question is, to what extent do you agree or disagree with the statement? It is necessary to have data in order to monitor progress in transformative education. I think we're having a problem with the live streaming. If Jun, you could provide me with an update whether to continue.
Yes, hello. We are working on it, so please allow us a few more seconds. Voila.
Fantastic. And so this is the QR code for the live stream, Jun, or for the Slido presentation?
So all the audience who are interested in, please either use this QR code or just type slido.com using a device. And the survey code is 850783. So maybe, Kate, could you read again that question? Thank you.
Of course. The question we would like you to answer today or respond to is, to what extent do you agree or disagree with the statement, it is necessary to have data in order to monitor progress in transformative education? If you could please take a couple of minutes to answer that question. So far, the answers are very strong. Hopefully we'll see that the responses coming up on the screen soon. Thank you. Thank you to everyone for responding so far. We've got 50% of people strongly agreeing, that we need data in order to monitor progress in transformative education. 42% on agree and 8% on neutral. Interesting. Thank you. Thank you to everyone for responding. Please feel free to keep adding your responses to that question. And now I think we'll turn to our presenters who hopefully can present some arguments related to that question. So we'll have, as I said at the start, we'll have three presentations today. 2 will be live and 1 will be a recorded video. So for our first presentation today, we welcome Mr. Doug McCall for today's concurrent session. And we welcome Mr. Doug McCall, the Executive Director of the International School Health Network. You can find Doug's full bio information on the platform, but Doug brings a wealth of experience in education and linked to health to this presentation today. So Doug, if you'd like to resume your presentation or start again, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And as I said before, I'm very pleased to be here and to thank the organizers of this session and for the forum. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about health and well-being, one of the 3 themes of this forum in terms of transformative education. I'm going to hopefully reflect the discussions we've been having in the FRESH partnership, which is a coalition of UN agencies, donor organizations, and a number of NGOs concerned with health and well-being. I'm also going to offer a word of advice from a small group of educator organizations which has recently convened about the process of transforming education. And I'll be discussing a project that we're undertaking with UNICEF and UNESCO and other partners that will collect information about health and well-being within the context of a broad approach to the whole child education and inclusion overall. As I said, health and well-being is one of the 3 topics, and I'm really pleased to see that's one of the 3 topics for this forum. It's been absent from some of these discussions in recent years, and I'm really pleased to have this opportunity. As well, I was very pleased to hear the Assistant Director General of UNESCO in her remarks beginning the session talking about how it's very important that children are healthy and happy. And that's kind of the core message for core idea behind health and well-being, or health and life skills education, as I'm going to talk about. I have a less than happy key point, which is reflected in the slide before you. And I think it underlines the gaps that we've really created around health and life skills education, which have been both deadly and also very confusing to many. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. There we go. This simple diagram is actually reflecting a whole lot of complexity underneath it. It's a diagram that has the child at the center in the school and goes outward into the neighborhood and community and so on. And it's a very layered ecological approach. I'm sure many have worked with this before. And I was reflecting on this about the discussion that was on transformative education yesterday in the forum, which was very rich and very interesting, but I didn't really think it reached a conclusion or really gave us too much guidance in terms of what we're trying to transform. And so I'm hoping that we're not trying to transform students to be able to have them change the world. I think we need to change the world before those students come out of school into the world. And that's a really important point, that we need to think about systems and changing systems. And of course, that leads to incremental change. I'm also worried about the verb transform, or in other cases, reimagine. I've been around education for a number of years, and there's always talk about reforming education, when in fact, the reforms are often stalled as they really hit the real world of schools. And I think we need to think about school improvement rather than school reform. And we also need to think about what is being transformed. The group of educators I referred to earlier is suggesting that we focus on incremental change. And the verbs I would use were build, rebuild, and refocus. We're halfway through, or less than halfway through, of building up the system based on the goal number 4 and the other UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we need to continue that work. And it's a progress that's been stalled, obviously, by COVID, but it was also difficult before COVID hit. Rebuilding after COVID is a very important aspect, and I'm sure everybody's going through that these days. And the last verb is refocus. The purposes of education are now open for discussion thanks to COVID. And I think we need to think about whether we really need to focus as much on the academic and the excellence aspects and refocus on things like safe custody and care in schools and the social functions of schools to socialize youngsters. The last idea on this slide is that we're not talking just about the education system, we're talking about other systems. Next slide, please. Excuse me, there are several ways of monitoring and reporting and evaluating, which are reflected in this slide. And this is a discussion we've been having in the Fresh Partnership. And you can see in the crowded slide that there are a number of different ways of doing it. Our project with UNESCO and with UNICEF is focused in on a survey and an in-depth analysis of policy, guidance, and curriculum documents. But there are a number of other ways of doing that kind of research. I think of that kind of data gathering, and I think it's data to improve, not simply just data, as has been stated before. So I think it's very important that we think about that we're not only collecting data, but we're also collecting a variety of data and a variety of input and a variety of opinions. Next slide, please. Measuring what matters. Very often, advocates for different programs try to get their program measured and monitored rather than measuring what matter overall. And so it's very important to keep that idea. I think it's going to be discussed later on in some of the other presentations in this session, but measuring what matters is very important. If you look at the discussion of health and life skills education, you look at it really is the best vehicle to teach vaccine literacy, personal hygiene, finding reliable health information, especially online, how to use protective equipment, how to help others, reducing stigma about seeking help, and being fundamentally concerned about the health of others rather than just seeing health as a personal possession or a personal responsibility. That's pretty relevant in these days of COVID. And it's really distressing to note, and this is after 20 years of work, that health and life skills education has been very poorly researched, practiced, and assessed and monitored. It's also been deliberately ignored by the SDG monitoring process of Target 4.7, and it's also been recently badly misunderstood by the Futures of Education Commission, where they confused health education and life skills education with sex ed and phys ed. It's particularly ironic that as we visit Korea, at least virtually in my case, that where the Incheon Declaration in 2015 specifically added health and life skills as part of the goals for student learning leading up to 2030. Next slide, please. Health and life skills education is a key component of a comprehensive approach. And it's hard to read this slide, but there on the left-hand slide, you have a number of what we call multi-component approaches, such as healthy schools, safe schools, child-friendly schools, community schools, and a variety of other approaches. There's over 20 of them. And then we have on the right-hand side a number of multi-intervention programs which are focused on urgent issues, be it child trafficking or be it physical activity or promoting peace. There are a number of specific programs. And health and life skills education is a key part of all of those programs. And so I think it's really important that as we take a systematic approach, that we recognize that all of these different approaches and programs are all part of promoting health and well-being. And it's important that we keep that in mind and we keep our focus on some of the core components. Education is not the only component. We have policy and services and a physical environment and a social environment to worry about, but education is a key component of all of those. We're doing, as part of our project, we're trying to create profiles of each of the countries and actually provinces and states. And we've been looking as a prototype, Manitoba, the province of Manitoba in Canada. And it's very interesting and reassuring, I think, that we found in that profile, and it's in the exhibit area, it'll be on the Fresh Partners website as well, is that the Manitoba is addressing over 15 of those different approaches and programs, and they're doing it in a very coherent way They have an interagency mechanism called Healthy Child Manitoba, which has really put together a coherent plan for addressing all of these different things. And that's a piece that's really missing in our coverage and our understanding about what needs to be monitored. Is there a coherent system, a coordinated system for all of these different things, or are they simply crowding in, competing with each other for the attention of educators? Next slide, please. Again, this slide is complicated and crowded, but if you look at starting with a little sunrise in the middle there with the early childhood, secondary, and primary and secondary schooling, if you look outwards to that list of close to subjects, each country will organize their subject matter slightly different, but those are the broad variety of subjects that most systems try to include. And those subjects need to include all those little bubbles above them, be it life skills, be it 21st century skills, be it education for sustainable development, be it health literacy. All those bubbles are what we call learning behavioral models, and they all need to be developed and understood better. One speaker yesterday talked about conceptual confusion, and I think that's a real case that's really a case for this discussion about the conceptual confusion about many of those ideas. They overlap and they haven't been properly sorted out for schools to be able to deal with. But also an important finding from a project that was done by the World Bank and UNICEF that said you take all those bubbles and you need to look at them within the subject areas to be able to measure and monitor them effectively. And so that's really important to be able to do that. If you go up to the next level, which is those large light blue letters of learning to be, learning to know, you'll recognize that's from the Delors Commission, which has really put together a nice map of what the purposes or roles, functions of schooling are, intellectual, social, vocational, and so on. And so that's an important concept. And then the last level, way up high, Julia, in her presentation, is going to remind us of the importance that culture has in terms of how we organize all that material. And she's going to talk about the idea of happiness as a cultural trait. I've been particularly struck by the work that's been done in Indigenous communities, where we talk about health not as a personal possession or a personal responsibility, but as a connection between the land and our ancestors. And so that's the kind of complexity of curriculum design that we need to think about. Next slide, please. This is an attempt by the Fresh Partners to describe what we call health and personal and social development education, or education for HPSD. Health and well-being is another way of saying that. You have the child at the center, you have the core subjects around the child, you have the UN goals around that, and all the different pieces that look at health and health and well-being. And you can see all the different components: the staff development, extracurricular activities, classroom instruction, school climate, and as well outside of the school, there are a number of partners in the community, in development agencies that also do informal education. And again, all those pieces need to fit together. That's an area of, again, a gap that we've not really measured properly. Everybody's in favor of extracurricular activities or co-curricular activities or learning in the community or online, but we're really not measuring and monitoring what is if you have a real purposeful plan, how many sessions, how many interventions are needed to be able to have an impact on children. And that's, again, part of the feature of, it's not only educators, but it's the other systems that are involved in education. Next slide, please. This is where we're getting into our project itself. Our focus is on systems and intended student outcomes. So we're looking at the unit of analysis and action is at the ministry level. There was a good presentation earlier this morning from Leanne Riley talking about presentations that have looked at the school level, and also from OECD looks at the student level. Our suggestion is, if we're looking at systems, we need to include ministries, not only education ministries, but all ministries as the unit of analysis. And we need to look at what they're intending to do and what their practices and structures are. So the approach we've taken is not just on a particular program, but on the whole child. And so as we work towards that narrow focus of health and life skills education, we're looking at a variety of different programs across the whole child spectrum. One issue we've explored in more depth is nutrition. The UNICEF program on school nutrition has been very helpful in allowing us to look at that as one set of interventions around one theme or topic as to illustrate that particular aspect. The fact-finding survey is going to report on status and structures and procedures and capacities of those various approaches. And we're going to be looking at enabling ongoing monitoring within the SDGs. That's a gap we hope to fill. We hope that some of the findings that we have in our survey and some of the collection of the documents we're going to do will be able to use ongoing to be able to monitor this effectively. The document analysis is going to be typical. There's many different examples of this around different themes like reduction of risk reduction for disasters and so on. There's a number of studies that have been done that. So our methodology is quite standardized or quite standard with other projects, but we're hoping that we're going to be able to create a vast collection of resource documents and policy documents and guidance documents that people will be able to use for other analyses and not just this particular one. An area that's really missing, and again, it's going to the gap analysis, is that because we've been focused on health topics, be it bullying or be it physical activity or HIV/AIDS or whatever, we've never really looked at what is the core set of learning competencies that need to be accomplished in a health and life skills education curriculum. And other subject areas have done that much more effectively. And it's been our fault as practitioners and advocates and researchers that we're not able to say what is the minimum kind of learning that we need to achieve for all students in a certain context. And that's a gap that we need to fill. Next slide, please. Just kind of walking the talk in terms of we want to have this project lead to improvements. And so we have 3 follow-up activities planned. We have been working with the International Research Network established by the World Education Research Association. And we hope to create from this project, we are creating from this project, a research agenda about health and life skills education. And our next session for that research network is at the American Education Research Association meeting in San Diego, California in the spring. There's also going to be a second follow-up is looking at a number of activities on school food and nutrition. We're going to be doing a kind of a community of practice strategy. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on in school food and nutrition these days. And so we're going to try to make sure our follow-up to this study is aligned with the many good things that are already happening, being led by UNICEF and the World Food Program and many other global organizations. It's a real area of hotbed of activity in the area of health and well-being. And so we're hoping that we can fit into that, what's already going on. Third one is a project that really is near and dear to my heart. It's looking at creating a set of profiles and pathways, or actually enabling a whole bunch of different organizations and researchers and countries to be able to create a profile of their work and pathways to improvement. And if you follow through in the exhibit area, there's a Manitoba example, which gives a really good example of how looking at documents can tell a really interesting story. And more importantly, if you share those documents in that profile with people in the country or the state or the province, they're able to learn from each other and to be able to share their data and to work towards improvement together. Last slide, please. And this is the contact information for myself and for the website where you can find more information about the project. Again, thank you for your attention. I look forward to discussion.
Doug, thank you so much for that 2-part presentation today. Really appreciate you sharing those insights, and from the Fresh Partnership. There's so many interesting diagrams and thoughts that have sprung to my mind in there about what a complex space you're working in, and thinking about how it works at both a local level and at a global level. And it really got me thinking about how we then develop monitoring systems or monitoring approaches that can meet the needs at both the local and the global level, given the conceptual complexity, I guess, you've got there in the field. I also, just before we move to our next presentation, I just wanted to acknowledge and thank for the comments in the chat. And Doug, you might just like to hold this in your mind a little. And someone's commented that the ecological systems approach to understanding and implementing transformative education goals is nice, but a concern for us working in an educational institution is how to expand transformative education initiatives in order for it to be encompassed in the higher systems or go beyond the school community partnerships that we have. And I think that's something that could be nice for us to pick up on in the panel Q&A if we end up having time at the end. So thank you, audience, and thank you, Doug. And now we'll move on to our second presentation for today. And for that, we welcome Mr. Antoine Marivin, who is joining us from France. Antoine is the Program Manager of the Regional Large-Scale Learning Assessment, co-managed by UNICEF East Asia and Pacific Regional Office, and the Secretariat of the Southeast Asia Minister of Education Organisations. Antoine's presentation is entitled, "What does the CPLAM 2019 survey tell us about citizenship education in primary schools of 6 Southeast Asian countries?" Thank you very much, Antoine. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Kate, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to share a quick preview of the Southeast Asian learning matrix settings and challenges to measure and report on global cities education at primary level. So I think this presentation is very well linked to what's happened with Doug. I think Doug mentions the overall will, and I think with under global citizenship topic addressed by CPLAM, you will see there is of course a lot of topics who are similar. So CPLAM regional program is sponsored by the Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Organization and UNICEF East Asia Pacific Regional Office. So the program was designed more than 5 years ago to enforce system and schools level policy and practice on learning and context in basic education as a regional complement and added value to national and international standards and large-scale assessment levels. So today, looking at students, we will try to better understand system outputs, inputs, and policy gaps and needs. Yes, please, can you go to the next slide?
Good morning.
And the next slide,
I'm
please.
pleased to share a quick preview of the Southeast Asian primary learning matrix settings and challenges to measure and report on global citizenship education at primary level. CPLAM regional program is sponsored by the Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Organization and the UNICEF East Asia Pacific Regional Office, EPRO. The program was designed more than 5 years ago to inform systems and schools level policies and practices on learning and context in basic education as a regional complement and added value to national and international and large-scale assessment models. CPLAM Regional Comparative Survey at primary level is a flagship study of the program and implemented its first round of data collection in 2019 while reporting results in reading and mathematics literacy on regional metrics. From the beginning, one of the mission and goals of this initiative was to build solid tools to inform children in foundational skills, but not only as the program put substantial effort to develop its own framework and tool to explore global citizenship, education, and integration in primary school.
Maybe try again now, Antoine. I'm not quite sure what happened there.
Yes, okay, I will start from there. I'm very sorry. So yes, let's try to reintroduce a bit. So global citizenship education in the framework of CPLAM was developed as an innovative sub-module for children and teachers in background questionnaires. So aside the main survey to capture academic learning as reading and mathematics. So the decision to develop such a tool and scale up the instrument to all CPLAM participating countries was commissioned by main stakeholders and participating countries to promote 21st century skills and report on SDG 4.7. So all CPLAM instruments were designed to provide comparable trends over time and space as other international and regional large-scale assessments. So in different languages, meaning for this first run, we have 11 languages from the 6 participating countries, from Myanmar to Philippines. So as you can imagine, this kind of research, it's a very long and time-consuming process. It seems we need 5 years to design, but also to implement and to report a result. So as other large-scale assessment, which is very important when we try to monitor, thanks to the data collection we have from the children, we can infer our result to at system level. So all samples are representative of the entire cohort, which is very authentic set of data. And I think that was an advantage thanks to what's happened in the recent months with COVID. We have now an authentic baseline to follow up any progress and changes before COVID-19. So this is, I think, important for our research. Next slide, please. Going now to the specific dimension of global citizenship in the framework of CPLAM 2019. It was very challenging for the program and the countries to sit down first and agree on a consensus definition on global citizenship, well, aligned on international standards, but compatible with grade 5 children development and curriculum targets at primary education. So thanks to different consultation and group reviews, audit of curriculum, the CPLAM program set the foundation of the CPLAM global citizenship concept in a theoretical framework available for more information. So this is more the qualitative part of the research. So the CPLAM captures major attitudes, skills, and topics recognized at the international community as peace, safety, security, collaboration, critical thinkings. But maybe what I would like to highlight is all questions address this topic not just at global level, but also at local, school, community level. So it makes sense for countries and for children at this age to address and take care of this issue at local level in comparison to what's happened at global level in global citizenship. So of course, all dimensions to live and collaborate together are captured under this framework. Then all questions were developed by experts from the Australian Council for Education and Research and reviewed by countries and partners. So at the end, we have around 15 questions for children and their teachers, and they were translated and pre-tested in all countries. So we follow international standard, and it was also why it was very consuming, but also a very collaborative approach and research action. So all questions at the end, as other research of this kind, are then organized in different dimensions: behaviors and skills, system issue and dynamics, identities and engagement. I invite you to go, all the data and the questionnaires are available online. So for this first one, we were not able to develop any cognitive measurement of topics. So this is kind of gap, but I think it's important for you to understand that. Yes, going to the next slide, please, as you, it's okay. No, the slide before. Okay, thank you. So yes, we have this series of questions. Now, please go to the next slide. Sorry. So we are now in the, we can go to the first, some result. I'm happy to highlight some of the result. Only one slide, but you can imagine we have a chapter of more than 20 pages. So this one is representing a result from the teachers. And here you have outputs from yes and no questions, or some liquid style questions on the level of perception of children and teachers. So for this one, all grade 5 teachers in the sample schools were asked whether children participate in activities related to global citizenship in a typical school year. So the percentage of children by level of opportunities for global citizenship education at school are displayed on this slide. So as you can see, across the 6 countries, the majority of children were with a teacher indicated that grade 5 children participated in school activities related to environmental sustainability, 69%, for example, helping poor and underprivileged people or group. But what I would like to flag, it's probably the low level of, for the category of children of activity related to collaboration and participation with children in other countries, around 10%, no matter the country. So you see how this type of data can identify a gap between concept and among children. So in all countries, some children in some schools were less practicing some activities. So it's good for country to understand where to fix the gap and what type of school concept to better invest. And also to reflect for setting the best learning sequence over the basic education curriculum. Next slide, please. So when applicable, as the survey was designed to develop quantitative tools and metrics, we try to develop also for this module quantitative metrics to report and compare the dimensions between countries. But for this type of exercise, it was more complex due probably to the age of children. So sometimes we managed to develop some index, for example, one on environmental sustainability issues, and we can compare the level of perception on children and the level of achievement in reading and mathematics with some interesting correlations, for example. So we can interpret the correlation, for example, we can understand that correlation may be influenced by the coverage of the topic at school as perceived by the children, and the emphasis placed on the topic. In some countries, the limitation is that the overall level of children literacy at this age is still emerging, and there are still a lot of children in many countries in the region who have some difficulties with foundational reading, which is complex when the instrument asks to read the questions. So in definitive, this kind of the CPLAM instrument gives some understanding on how children perform on abstract concept and topic related to global citizenship through paper pencil text. So the research didn't manage to establish in unidimensional metrics, which was probably what we failed for the first round. So yes, can you go previously first? I have some, yes. And the slide before, please. So maybe just some comments, policy comments on that, or some limitation probably because we don't really have time. In basic educations, children development of regional and global values relies on the effort of teachers, schools, and community to encourage citizen values and skills. So when it deals to regional and global values, we understand that children who are not yet at this level in grade 5, and probably because this is not the focus at primary level. In most of the countries, the focus was placed on the local citizenships in general and values among the schools. But in the meantime, children show particular interest, positive attitude on issues affecting the communities, as I mentioned, particularly on the ones on environmental issues, social cohesion. So I'm pretty sure after this COVID-19 pandemic and during this COVID-19 pandemic, if we ask again to develop these tools, we would probably include more health topics, and I'm pretty sure it will be a very important domain of interest for children and teachers. Most of the teachers indicated they were prepared for and felt confident for teaching most of the topics listed in the Global Citizenship Questionnaire, which is a good news. But in the meantime, most of them mentioned that they had some lack to perform and to teach on regional and global values and attitudes. So for instance, less than 60% of grade 5 children identify themselves as Asian citizens. So of course, some challenge for policymakers. I think one good question for the next panel discussion will be how to better frame regional, global concept in primary curriculum, while keeping national citizenship value and cultural beliefs as core goals. Of course, while providing equal opportunities for all children to develop citizenship value, behaviors, and skills. My last slide, probably I will speak about some limitation. Young age of children was a particular limitation in our studies. Children responses strongly depend on the reading and oral proficiency in the language of instruction. So probably we can reflect on that. It will probably increase social desirability bias for this type of research at grade 5. So the children responses show their views on a range of topics rather than a comprehensive understanding of global citizenship concept as a whole dimension. Again, the final numbers of reliable constructed scales is limited at the end. So we intended to create about 15 scales. At the end, we realize only 5 scales. And what's next for research on global citizenship as part of one module of CPLAM 2019 survey? So CPLAM is designed to measure progress over time. So the question for us would be how to update this module for the next round, and is it possible to measure some progress and some changes while disseminating the question and concept? So this is part of the response for CPLAM. All questions and data are released at system level, so all teachers and schools can use the questions if they want to perform some questions in the day-to-day classroom assessment. Thank you so much for your attention. I invite you to go further to CPLAM survey and tools. Everything is online for free. And of course, besides this initiative in the Southeast Asian region, UNICEF in other regions is also exploring the development of tools to measure progress on soft and transferable skills, well-being and mental health. There is a promising approach with a particular focus on the most disadvantaged population. Thank you so much for your attention. I'm very excited to go to the next panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antoine. Really appreciate you sharing that insight from your project. I think it's super interesting how when we think about monitoring and measuring for global citizenship, how that can change as students move through the year levels, and also how that can change amidst a evolving global context, I guess. And so that's a very interesting time to be measuring students' understandings there. So we'll move now to our third presenter. And our third presentation is going to be shared by a pre-recorded video. And it's from Ms. Julia Kim. And Julia is the Program Director of the Gross National Happiness Centre in Bhutan. The centre leads initiatives that bring the principles and practices of gross national happiness into action in the spheres of transformative education, systems change, and leadership development. And so for this last presentation, if we could ask the technical team in Korea, please, to run the video for us. Thank you.
Thank you for... Hello, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging and thanking UNESCO and AppsU for inviting me to speak at this session. I will be speaking about measuring what matters, a systems view of well-being and transformative education. So I'd like to just begin by saying I'll be covering the importance of a systems view and bringing up the example of Bhutan and gross national happiness in terms of new measures of progress. And finally, I'll be concluding with a few questions for reflection that maybe will be sparking some of the conversation in the discussions that follow. So just to begin with systems perspective, this metaphor of the iceberg I find really helpful. For many of us, the world that we see is the top of the iceberg, which is maybe 1/7 of what is actually included. And what lies below the surface are often the things that don't make it to the newspaper headlines that aren't just the visible symptoms or behaviors. So if we look below the surface of whether it's the education system or the sustainable development crises that we're facing, what we don't often look at are the structures and the systems that have led to those behaviors. And below that, the paradigms of thought, the stories we tell ourselves, our mental models and how they feed into that. And finally, even below that level is the vision, what conditions our sense of purpose. And this is as true in the education system as anywhere else. So in Bhutan, with vision and values, the first Prime Minister of Bhutan really asked, what is the purpose of development? And he said that G&H really refers to the deep, abiding happiness that comes from living life in full harmony with our natural world, connected to our communities and other beings, and with our culture and spiritual heritage. In short, from feeling totally connected with our world. So really putting forward the idea of a well-being economy that was in contrast to the GDP development model, in which he says limited resources and boundless growth on this planet no longer make economic sense. So from this point of view, Bhutan's development approach of G&H is balancing both material and spiritual development and outer systems change, which means new measures, new policies, with a shift in consciousness, with values and mindsets. And as I continue, I think you'll start to see how this resonates and has a relevance for how we think about education. Many of you may be aware that gross national happiness, the phrase was coined by the fourth king of Bhutan when he was asked by a reporter, what is the GDP of the country? And instead of giving a number, he said that gross national happiness is more important than gross national product. So really coining that phrase and drawing attention to the fact that in Bhutan, happiness was going to be more important to men than domestic product and growth. And around the same time, Robert Kennedy was making a statement that GDP measures everything in life except that which makes life worthwhile. So our obsession with starts in the 1940s when we adopted this measure with the World Bank and the IMF, taking us out of the Great Depression, which made sense. Look at marketed economic activity, but it's problematic and was never intended to be a measure of progress in a country, even by its inventor, Simon Kuznets. And the reasons for GDP is being a difficult and not very helpful indicator of progress is what it counts, what it fails to count, and what it hides, which is uneven growth and rising inequality. So many of the things that it doesn't count are unpaid childcare, time use, time with family and friends, even though this is really important for a sense of well-being. We have interesting evidence that wealthier countries are not necessarily happier. You can see GDP per capita going up in blue in the United States, while population levels of well-being are staying the same or even dropping. And in comparing different countries, different developed countries in the world, the more countries become unequal, and you see the United States on the upper right corner is highly unequal, the worse they fare in terms of things like literacy levels, education, homicides, drug use, mental health. All these indications of well-being get worse when countries get unequal. So another reason why GDP is not necessarily a good indicator of progress. So what that means is that when Bhutan hosted this UN high-level meeting at New York in 2012, many leaders came together to look at how we could launch a beyond GDP movement that would really focus well-being and happiness as a purpose of development. It really looks at measuring 9 domains, and all of these are seen as creating an environment that supports well-being. 33 indicators that are measured in the survey, again, balancing both the material and less tangible factors. So things like time use, community vitality, cultural diversity, and resilience, all of which have been revealed to be really important for well-being during the COVID pandemic. Education is one of the domains that are measured, but it's interesting that it's not just educational attainment, but also the values and the cultural knowledge and understanding in the society. So all this to really make the point that just because it's not easily measured does not mean something is not important. So in Bhutan, this is operationalized by, again, the clear vision of the leadership, prioritizing well-being of all life. It's operationalized by having measures in a survey that's undertaken every 2 to 3 years. This then influences policy through a G&H screening tool, and then it influences action in daily life through practice in leadership, business, education, and youth. Altogether, this is a systems change, getting below the surface of the iceberg I mentioned earlier. And it's interesting that well-being economies and new measures of progress are being taken up in many countries outside of Bhutan now. So again, coming back to this idea of transformative education, in Bhutan, they have rolled out a national level education for G&H strategy, bringing these values and approaches into the system and curricula that include values, culture, meditation, happiness skills, a lot of what is important to this initiative that UNESCO has been heading. We also know the pressures of the current metrics for progress in the education system. And there are efforts to look at revamping the PISA scoring because of the pressure it puts on schools, the short-term attention on quick fixes that help a country climb up the rankings, the fact that it could detract from less measurable education objectives, which are very important, physical, moral, civic, and artistic development. And it narrows the vision of what education is and should be about. So I'm going to close with some questions for reflection that came to me as I was thinking about this presentation and this current moment we're in, when we're looking at a transformative education for the really transformative times we're in. And that's a picture of the young Greta Thunberg, who many of you know has really started a global movement for climate action around the world. Measuring what matters is really important. And the question is, how can the less tangible but no less important measures be included as we go forward? We know that the OECD is now taking forward efforts to review PISA, including the social emotional learning indicators. So what more will be needed to give that momentum as we go forward? We need to reconsider how success is measured and promoted all the way up through higher education. It's not just at the lower ages and the lower grades. And again, a reminder of the importance of working at a systems level, thinking about education, the vision and values supported by the metrics. How does that then influence education policy and then translate to programs, curricula, and action on the ground? I think when we think about global citizenship, sustainability, and well-being, we have to ask, to what extent must transformative changes in the education system be matched by transformation in other key sectors? So the well-being economies that I mentioned earlier, government, business, and civil society, so that these skills and capacities that we're grooming in children can be met by the job market and the opportunities that they want to step into. They have to be moving in synchronization. And finally, that leads to the question on what is the role of the SDG framework and UN systems and partners to support this kind of coordinated systems level transformation. So I'd like to stop there and again, really thank the organizers, UNESCO and APSU, for inviting me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julia, for our third presentation there. And it offers quite a different perspective from our other presenters today. And so perhaps in view of the fact that time has run short with our small interruption at the beginning, so what we might do is turn to our presenters once again for some closing remarks. And those closing remarks, perhaps they might like to reflect on our final presentation, what Julia was suggesting about gross national happiness and some of the questions that she raised at the end. But they also bring themselves, Julia's presentation sort of springs to mind the question of what can be measured and what else cannot or should not be measured. And so perhaps to close with, we might turn to our presenters again. Maybe we'll start with Antoine. And to just have a brief reflection on that for us, please.
Yes, thank you, Kate. No, I think this question makes particularly sense, particularly now in the context with limited resources and crisis, COVID-19 crisis and recovery. So yes, it put system on tensions, and the function of measurements and tensions as every time this type of crisis. So I think the question is, yes, to track progress, to track changes. So there is different way. We have the qualitative side, which is very important to track policy and changes at system level, but we still need to continue to invest in the quantitative side. And we are not really able to measure that in all domains of interest, as you noticed through the CPLAM presentation, but it's not the only one. And this getting more complex if we add the question of age and the sequence of learning. So I think what is very important is to not just to reflect on this question as a whole topic, but to reflect on this question on the learning continuum. What do we want in primary grades? What do we want later at the end of the transition with secondary grades? Do we still want the same everything every time at system level to the school level? Are we still ambitious to continue and address this question at secondary school? And probably now with the development of lifelong learning, countries and partners maybe should have interest to invest in these questions for adults. So I think I would say there is not just one response. There is a question of thinking that in articulation to make sense and to produce regular and quantitative, well, regular but also effective data to report progress. Because otherwise, if we invest in the limited time in all categories, we won't be able to inform well the systems, because it can go to the system through the children levels and the school level. I'm particularly sure that at early age, I would advise all systems to better invest in classroom assessments, for example, instead of going directly to the quantitative level. Thank you so much. I know the time is limited. Thanks.
Thank you, Antoine. Doug, over to you, final remarks.
Just if we're looking at measuring change in systems, then we need to have a different kind of set of concepts. And so Julia's presentation was reminded of that. So that if we're looking and systems, education systems are very large, complex, and they're very big bureaucracies, very composed of a lot of different levels of professionals. And so how do we change that over time? And what are the measures? And in the dialogue box, there was a question about what systems change model do I like? And I have a couple. But more importantly, are the countries using a systems change model? Like, that's a really practical question. They can choose whatever they want, and they can also choose to focus on what they want to change in their system. But they need to have a model. They need to have a paradigm that they're working with. And that would be, I think my comment is to enable countries to be able to find those kinds of tools, those kinds of paradigms that best suit their needs.
Fantastic. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Antoine. Thank you both so much, and to our online presenter for your really thoughtful and thought-provoking presentations today. I just wanted to let the audience know before we close that there'll be a short summary of this session available on the discussion board later today, where people can also add their comments. This session is being followed by a short 15-minute break, and so we invite you to join us again at 11 o'clock Paris time, which is 1910 Korean time, for a special session on experiences from the Republic of Korea and beyond, progress, challenges, and new visions. So before we go, thank you once again to Doug and Antoine, and a huge thanks to our technical team in Korea and June for coordinating this session. It's not an easy thing to do, so we really appreciate it. And thank you to our audience for joining in. Okay, we'll see you soon. Bye.